Friday, August 7th, 2026, and we left off on Genesis 10, verse 1. These are the generations of the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Sons were born to them after the flood. The sons of Japheth, Gomer, Magog, Madai, Javan, Tubal, Mesech, and Tiras. So I'm curious, we read about Magog in Revelation, so let's see what the tie is there, or if that's intentional or deliberate, I should say. I read about Magog in Revelation. What is the relation to the Magog mentioned here, if any? Boom, 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 boom. Yes, there is a direct biblical connection, but Magog develops from the name of a person/people in Genesis into a symbolic end times enemy in Revelation. This is part of the table of nations after the flood. The names often function not only as individuals, but as ancestors and eponyms of peoples or nations descended from them. Oh, I see. So those were, okay. Leaders and a people named after said leaders. So Magog begins as a descendant of Noah through Japheth, and by extension, the people associated with that name. Okay. The important bridge to Revelation is Ezekiel 38 through 39. Ezekiel describes a mysterious enemy called Gog, the land of Magog, who leads a coalition including Mesech and Tubal, interestingly also names from Genesis 10:2, against God's people. God decisively destroys this invading force and demonstrates his holiness before the nations. Then Revelation 27 through 10 deliberately picks up Ezekiel's language. After Satan is released, he will come out to deceive the nations that are at the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them for battle. I see. So they're representative of the people that stand against God's people at the end of time, just like they did at the beginning of time. Notice something has changed. Revelation isn't simply talking about one descendant of Japheth named Magog anymore. Gog and Magog have become symbols for the nations of the world gathered in final rebellion against God. Revelation even says they come from the four corners of the earth, which makes the worldwide scope explicit. So the biblical progression is roughly Genesis 10, there is Magog, the descendant of Japheth, and representing an ancestral nation. Next mention is in Ezekiel, Gog from the land of Magog, an enemy who attacks God's people and is destroyed by God. Then in Revelation 20, Gog and Magog are used symbolically, imagery reused for the final worldwide rebellion against God. All right, interesting. Okay, let's go back. Okay, so, Genesis 10. Verse 3. The sons of Gomer, Ashkenaz, Riphath, and Togarmah. The sons of Javan, Elisha, Tarshish, Kittim, and Dodanim. From these the coastland people spread in their lands, each with his own language, by their clans in their nations. I wonder why. So why their own language even this early on, even before Babel? Why would these people have developed their own language even early on at this point in humanity? And how? That's a really interesting detail in Genesis 10. especially because at first glance it seems to collide with what Genesis says immediately afterward, saying the whole earth had one language and the same words. Oh, okay. Yeah, that is a clash. The key is that Genesis 10 is describing the world after the nations had developed, not necessarily giving a strict chronological sequence of events, right? So we've learned that the Bible often reads as a summary and then it'll give you detail after the fact, but it can be confusing if you're expecting it. If you're taking it at face value and expecting it all to mean it all happened chronologically. So you have to pay attention. Genesis 10:5 says the descendants of Japheth spread into different territories, each with his own language, and similar language appears later for Ham and Shem. And then Genesis 11:1-9 essentially backs up and explains how those different languages came about, the Tower of Babel. Okay, so they are connected. That was my next question. Okay, so we'll get through Genesis 11, and then if we have more questions, we'll come back to this. So, what is this? No. What the heck? The sons of Ham, verse 6. The sons of Ham, Cush, Egypt, Put, and Canaan. The sons of Cush, Seba, Havilah, Sabta, Rama, Sabteka. It's a cool name, Sabteka. The sons of Rama, Sheba, and Dedan. Cush fathered Nimrod. He was the first on earth to be a mighty man. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Therefore it is said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. The beginning of his kingdom was Babel, Erech, Akkad, and Calneh in the land of Shinar. From that land he went into Assyria and built Nineveh, Rehoboth, Ir, Calah, and Rezin between Nineveh and Calah. That is the great city. Egypt fathered Ludim, Anamim, Lehabim, Naphtuhim, Pathruzim, Casluhim, from whom the Philistines came, and Caphtorim. Canaan fathered Sidon, his firstborn, and Heth, and the Jebusites, the Amorites, the Girgashites, the Hivites, the Arkites, the Sinites, the Arvadites, the Zemarites, and the Hamathites. Afterward, the clans of the Canaanites dispersed, and the territory of the Canaanites extended from Sidon in the direction of Gerar as far as Gaza, and in the direction of Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, and Zeboim as far as Lasha. These are the sons of Ham by their clans, their languages, their lands, and their nations. To Shem also, the father of all the children of Eber, the elder brother of Japheth, children were born. The sons of Shem, Elam, Asser, Arpachshad, Lud, and Aram. The sons of Aram, Uz, Hul, Gether, and Mash. Arpachshad fathered Shelah, and Shelah fathered Eber. To Eber were born two sons. The name of one was Peleg. For in his days the earth was divided, and his brother's name was Joktan. Joktan fathered Almodad, Shelef, Hazarmaveth, Jerah, Hadaram, Uzzah, Diklah, Obal, Abimael, Sheba, Ophir, Havilah, and Jobab. All these were the sons of Joktan. The territory in which they lived extended from Mesha in the direction of Sephar to the hill country of the east. These are the sons of Shem, by their clans, their languages, their lands, and their nations. These are the clans of the sons of Noah, according to their genealogies, in their nations, and from these nations, the nations spread abroad on the earth after the flood. Now the whole earth had one language and the same words, and as people migrated from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. And they said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly." and they had brick for stone, and bitumen for mortar. Then they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the face of the whole earth." And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower, which the children of man had built. And the Lord said, "Behold, they are one people, and they all have, behold, they are one people, and they have all one language. And this is only the beginning of what they will do. And nothing that they propose to do will now be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and there confuse, Come, let us go down and there confuse their language, so that they may not understand one another's speech." So the Lord dispersed them from there over the face of all the earth, and they left off building the city. Therefore its name was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth. And from there the Lord dispersed them over the face of all the earth. So it's interesting because it doesn't really. I always thought in this story here that there would be some kind of contention where they, maybe that comes later, but where they, I don't know, started to worship themselves or become arrogant, and maybe that's implicit in what they're saying. But let's ask about that. Let's see, Genesis 11. So I have my spot, verse 9. Why do theologians think that God was displeased with the actions of the humans? I always thought that in this story they would have done something to anger God. Was it by their arrogance, or is that implied and I am just missing the point? Yes, arrogance and pride is one major traditional interpretation, but there's a little more going on in Genesis 11 than they built a really tall building and God got mad. The text never explicitly says God was angry because they were proud. The interpretation comes from several clues in the story, and especially from how the story connects to the surrounding chapters. The most revealing line may actually be this one, where they say, "Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the face of the whole earth." That gives us a few overlapping reasons theologians have understood Babel as rebellion. Oh, I see, because God did tell them to spread across the earth. That's right. Okay. And they didn't want to do that. Okay, that actually makes a lot more sense. Okay, number one, they are deliberately resisting humanity's commission to spread. Earlier in Genesis, God repeatedly tells humanity to multiply and fill the earth. After the flood, Noah and his sons receive essentially the same command: be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. And then Babel was counter to that. Okay, so that part makes sense, but however, let me see if it mentions it. I'm curious about, I don't think it's going to. Let me see. So here where it says, "And the Lord said, behold, they are one people, and they have all one language, and this is only the beginning of what they will do, and nothing that they propose to do will now be impossible for them." This is really interesting. I suppose this speaks to the power of, it sounds corny, but like the power of teamwork. Like if humanity wasn't so busy warring with one another, you could probably interpret that as we'd already be in space or something like that. is a crude interpretation of this that humanity would be much further along technologically if it were not for war and corruption and greed. It seems interesting to me that God himself would say this about humanity and nothing being out of their grasp. What do the theologians say about this and what it says about the capability of humanity? Yes, with an important qualification. I think your crude interpretation is actually touching something that many Jewish and Christian interpreters have noticed in the Tower of Babel story. Genesis 11:6 is an unusually striking statement about human beings. God said, "Behold, they are one people, and they have all one language. And this is only the beginning of what they will do, and nothing that they propose to do will now be impossible for them." What makes it especially interesting is exactly what you noticed. This isn't humanity boasting about itself. God says it. The Hebrew is somewhat less metaphysically absolute than the English can sound. It doesn't mean human beings literally become omnipotent. Yeah, that's not how I took it. But I mean, in terms of technology development is really what I think about. The idea is closer to nothing they plan/intend will be inaccessible or withheld from them. But even with that qualification, God's assessment of humanity's collective capability is remarkably strong, but then again, we're made in his image, so, not a big shocker. And there's a fascinating theological tension here, and he did name us to rule the earth, so there you go. Babel isn't really a story about technology being evil. A common children's Bible version is basically humans built a really tall tower because they were arrogant, so God knocked them down a peg. But the actual text is more subtle. Their technological breakthrough is explicitly mentioned. They say, "Come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly." That sounds mundane to us, but baked bricks plus bitumen. What is that? They don't have a look up. There we go. Bitumen, a black viscous mixture of hydrocarbons obtained naturally or as a residue from petroleum distillation. Oh wow, okay. So kind of like asphalt. It made large-scale urban construction possible where stone and timber were scarce. Then humans discover something even more powerful than bricks: coordination. They have shared language, shared goals, concentrated population, technological knowledge, and organized labor. And God's observation in verse 6 is essentially, look what coordinated humanity is capable of. The problem doesn't appear to be that God fears skyscrapers, of course not. The problem is what enormously capable human beings will do with concentrated power. That distinction has mattered to the theologians for a very long time. Let's look at some of these pictures. These are cool. I don't know if these are prototypes, paintings. What is this? These don't seem like real places that could be real. It doesn't seem crazy. Augustine gives you something surprisingly close to your intuition. Augustine of Hippo interpreted Babel within his larger distinction between the city of God and the human earthly city. Human civilization can accomplish extraordinary things through cooperation, political organization, invention, commerce, art, and learning. The problem is that human beings don't merely coordinate their intelligence, we also coordinate our disordered desires. So civilization magnifies both. You can build an aqueduct, you can build a siege engine, you can organize millions of people to eradicate a disease, you can organize millions of people into an army. Yeah, exactly. Okay. Yeah, that's really, that's interesting to think about. Verse 7. Come, let us go down, and there confuse their language, so that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord dispersed them from there over the face of all the earth, and they left off building the city. Therefore its name was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth, and from there the Lord dispersed them over the face of all the earth. These are the generations of Shem. When Shem was 100 years old, he fathered Arpachshad. He had a baby at 100, 2 years after the flood. And Shem lived after he fathered Arpachshad 500 years, and had other sons and daughters. When Arpachshad had lived 35 years, he fathered Shelah. And Arpachshad lived after he fathered Shelah 403 years, and had other sons and daughters. So this brings up another interesting point too, because earlier in Genesis, right before the flood, God said that man's years would be 120, and we didn't know if that meant that was the new maximum lifespan, or if it was 120 years until the flood. But this pretty much answers that, because these, like Shem and the people after the flood, were still living for like centuries, 500 years, 600 years, 400 years. But let's ask about that. So wait, this is Genesis 11, verse 13. Earlier in Genesis, God mentions that humanity's years will be 120. And at the time, it seemed like he could either be referring to the amount of time they have left before the flood, or that he was shortening man's total lifespan. But it seems like that is not the case, since even after the flood, Noah's sons were living for multiple centuries. What do the theologians say about this? Yes, you've spotted exactly why Genesis 6:3 has generated a long-running interpretive debate. The post-flood genealogies are one of the strongest arguments against reading the 120 years as an immediate hard cap on individual human lifespan. Genesis 6:3 says, "Then the Lord said, my spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh. His days shall be 120 years." There are basically two major interpretations, plus a third that combines aspects of them. So the first interpretation, the 120 years are a countdown to the flood. On this reading, God isn't saying from now on nobody can live beyond 120. He's saying something closer to humanity has 120 years remaining before judgment comes. This fits the immediate literary context rather well. Genesis 6 moves directly from God's declaration about humanity's corruption to his determination to destroy humanity in the flood. In fact, the NET Bible actually translates the end of Genesis 6:3 as "they will remain for 120 more years." Yeah. Its translators explicitly explain that although some understand the verse as limiting human life expectancy to 120, the subsequent Genesis narrative makes that interpretation difficult. They therefore favor understanding it as the internal remaining before the flood. I suppose it could also be, though, that God was talking about subsequent generations, because the 120 years thing now obviously applies. We don't have people living multiple centuries, and so it really seems to have at some point applied. So it could be that too. And this isn't merely a modern solution invented to get around the genealogies. It's an old interpretation. Christian interpreters such as John Calvin understood the 120 years as a period of divine patience before the coming judgment, and versions of this interpretation appear much earlier in Jewish and Christian interpretation. Your observation about Genesis 11 fits this reading. Shem lives 600 years, 100 plus 500. Arpachshad, 438. Shelah, 433. Eber, 464. And it doesn't stop there. Abraham later dies at 175, Isaac at 180, Jacob at 147, and Joseph at 110. So if Genesis 6:3 means effective immediately, the maximum biological lifespan of a human being is 120 years, Genesis itself repeatedly violates that rule. That's a serious difficulty for that interpretation, which is why it's probably not correct. The second interpretation, the 120 years establish a new human lifespan, but gradually. Yeah, this is what I think it is. There is nevertheless a significant interpretive tradition that understands Genesis 6:3 as referring to human longevity. On this reading, God isn't necessarily saying that everyone born after this declaration will instantly be incapable of exceeding 120. Rather, Genesis is announcing a divine restriction on the extraordinary longevity characteristic of primeval humanity, which subsequently takes effect over generations. Yep. Okay, so yeah, after the flood, you can see the numbers dwindle. Look at that. That's pretty interesting. Yeah. Genesis portrays longevity as collapsing over successive generations rather than falling immediately from 900 to 120. Let's see. Deuteronomy 34:7 says, Moses was 120 years old when he died. His eye was undimmed and his vigor unabated. What does that mean? That's interesting. His vigor unabated. Meaning like he was still spry up until the day he died. Unabated, without any reduction in intensity or strength. Yeah, okay. So he, was 120 years old when he died. His eye was undimmed and his vigor unabated. Which obviously isn't how it works now for us. By the time we hit 120, we've obviously lost a step, or 5 or 10, if we even get there. I think the average lifespan now is into the high 60s or low 70s. So some interpreters see Genesis 6:3 as announcing the eventual normalization of human life around 120 years. And then interpretation 3 would be that it carries both of those ideas. So we won't go through that whole shabibbity. Okay. Well, that was interesting. What verse was that? Shoot. That was verse 13, Genesis 11:13. Okay. When Shelah had lived 30 years, he fathered Eber, and Shelah lived after he fathered Eber 403 years, and had other sons and daughters. When Eber had lived 34 years, he fathered Peleg, and Eber lived after he fathered Peleg 430 years, and had other sons and daughters. When Peleg had lived 30 years, he fathered Reu, and Peleg lived after he fathered Reu 209 years and had other sons and daughters. When Reu had lived 32 years, he fathered Serug, and Reu lived after he fathered Serug 207 years and had other sons and daughters. When Serug had lived 30 years, he fathered Nahor, and Serug lived after he fathered Nahor 200 years and had other sons and daughters. When Nahor had lived 29 years, he fathered Terah, and Nahor lived after he fathered Terah 119 years and had other sons and daughters. When Terah had lived 70 years, he fathered Abram, Nahor, and Haran. Now these are the generations of Terah. Terah fathered Abram, Nahor, and Haran fathered Lot. Haran died in the presence of his father Terah in the land of his kindred, in Ur of the Chaldeans. And Abram and Nahor took wives. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife Milcah, the daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah and Iscah. Now Sarai was barren, she had no child. Terah took Abram his son, and Lot the son of Haran his grandson, and Sarai his daughter-in-law, his son Abram's wife, and they went forth together from Ur of the Chaldeans to go into the land of Canaan. But when they came to Haran, they settled there. The days of Terah were 205 years, and Terah died in Haran. Genesis 12, verse 1. Now the Lord said to Abram, "Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. And I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." So Abram went, as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. And Abram took Sarai his wife, and Lot his brother's son, and all their possessions that they had gathered, and the people that they had acquired in Haran, and they set out to go to the land of Canaan. When they came to the land of Canaan, Abram passed through the land to the place at Shechem, to the oak of Moreh. At that time the Canaanites were in the land. Then the Lord appeared to Abram and said, "To your offspring I will give this land." So he built there an altar to the Lord who had appeared to him. From there he moved to the hill country on the east of Bethel and pitched his tent. With Bethel on the west and Ai on the east, there he built an altar to the Lord and called upon the name of the Lord. And Abram journeyed on, still going toward the Negeb. The Negeb? I guess it's a place. Now there was a famine in the land. So Abram went down to Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was severe in the land. When he was about to enter Egypt, he said to Sarai his wife, "I know that you are a woman beautiful in appearance, and when the Egyptians see you, they will say, 'This is his wife.' Then they will kill me, but they will let you live. Say you are my sister, that it may go well with me because of you, and that my life may be spared for your sake." When Abram entered Egypt, the Egyptians saw that the woman was very beautiful. And when the princes of Pharaoh saw her, they praised her to Pharaoh. And the woman was taken into Pharaoh's house. And for her sake he dealt well with Abram. And he had sheep, oxen, male donkeys, male servants, female donkeys, and camels. But the Lord afflicted Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarai, Abram's wife. So Pharaoh called Abram and said, "What is this you have done to me? Why did you not tell me that she was your wife? Why did you say, 'She is my sister,' so that I took her for my wife? Now then, here is your wife. Take her and go." And Pharaoh gave men orders concerning him, and they sent him away with his wife and all that he had. So this is interesting. This is, I guess, you could almost say this was God's plan to, although it seems a bit, who am I to judge? But this seems like God's plan to give Abram all the blessings that he talked about. But well, let's ask about it. What I think is interesting is that the blessing doesn't just come out from the sky. It comes from the earth. Like, it wasn't just like quote unquote magic, for lack of a better term. Actually, let me grab a snippet there so we can. It also doesn't say how he found out, but I don't think that's ultra important. Let me see. Let me just grab this. Bam, bam, bam. It seems like this was part of God's plan in the sense that he was going to bless Abram with many things and many resources, but rather than making them appear out of thin air, he used Egypt to give them to him, or rather the Pharaoh. What do the theologians say about this encounter? And more specifically, the fact that there is deception involved in the plan. I think that's also kind of interesting. Yes, this is one of the morally uncomfortable parts of the Abram story. And many interpreters think that discomfort, blah, blah, blah. And many interpreters think that discomfort is intentional. The text does not actually say that Abram's deception was God's plan or that God approved it. A common reading among Jewish and Christian interpreters is that Genesis 12:10-20 is showing God preserving his promise despite Abram's fearful and morally compromised attempt to preserve himself. Okay, yeah. That seems more likely. That distinction matters enormously. Yes, it does. Forgive me, Lord. Earlier, God had just promised Abram, I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great. Then famine comes. Abram goes to Egypt, becomes afraid that the Egyptians will kill him for Sarai, and devises the "she is my sister" strategy. He consequently receives sheep, cattle, donkeys, servants, and camels because of Sarai. So your observation is exactly where the theological tension lies. Abram really does emerge from Egypt with substantial wealth. But does that mean God intended the deception as the mechanism of blessing? Most theologians would hesitate to make that move. The striking thing is that God never tells Abram to do any of this. That's true, he doesn't. There is no, and the Lord said to Abram, go down to Egypt and lie. And there is certainly no divine instruction to deceive Pharaoh. Instead, Abram reasons internally, I know that you are a woman beautiful in appearance, and when the Egyptians see you, they will say, this is his wife, then they will kill me. His motivation is explicitly fear and self-preservation. And there is a fascinating irony in the story. God has just promised, essentially, I will protect you, bless you, and make a nation from you. Yet almost immediately, Abram encounters danger and starts engineering his own survival. In other words, Genesis may be asking, will Abram trust the promise, or will he manufacture his own security? And at this point, he doesn't do especially well. That becomes even more clear because Pharaoh ends up sounding morally better than Abram. He says, what is this you have done to me? Why did you not tell me that she was your wife? That's remarkable. The pagan king rebukes the man who has just received God's covenant promise. Early Christian interpreters noticed this difficulty. Augustine, for example, tried to distinguish Abram's statement from an outright falsehood because Sarai really was his relative. Yeah, that's a technicality. But, I mean, the spirit of it was deceptive, right? So that's kind of you can't really get away from that. Genesis 20:12 later identifies her as Abraham's half-sister. But even if she is my sister is technically true, the narrative makes clear that Abram is using a partial truth with the intention of producing a false belief. Modern ethical categories would ordinarily call that deception. And other interpreters are considerably harder on Abram. Calvin, for instance, does not treat it's the same guy, I think. God gives him a new name. Abraham's conduct as something Christians should imitate. His broader point is that Scripture can faithfully portray the failures of its saints rather than turning them into flawless heroes. Another good point. So what about all the wealth? This is where your question gets especially interesting. Abram receives livestock and servants from Pharaoh because Pharaoh believes Sarai is available for marriage. Then Pharaoh discovers the truth, returns Sarai, and sends Abram away with his wife and all that he had. So Genesis 13 immediately says, now Abram was very rich in livestock, in silver, and in gold. So there's undeniably a literary connection between the Egyptian episode and Abram's increasing wealth. But there's a crucial distinction between saying God blessed Abram through Abram's deception and saying God sovereignly brought blessing out of a situation containing Abram's deception. The second fits the narrative much better. I agree. Genesis repeatedly portrays God accomplishing his purposes through, around, and sometimes in spite of human wrongdoing. Okay, so that, I mean, I think that beats that dead horse, but that's yeah, that's interesting. Okay. So where are we? Dang it. I read for so long and then I forget where the heck. That was Genesis 12 verse 20. Genesis 12 verse 20. Oh, I even highlighted it. Okay, so I guess that's a good stopping point then. So that brings us to the end of Genesis 12. Tomorrow we'll start on Genesis 13, verse 1. Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to drop a sub, share it with a friend. God bless you guys.